Hi, Grief and Loss Workshop participants. I'm looking forward to our second session, Thursday, May 21st at 7 p.m. on Zoom. This week, we will be focusing on the stages and tasks of grief, featuring David Kessler, who co-wrote 2 books with Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. In her last book on grief and grieving, Kubler-Ross asked Kessler to help adapt the 5 stages she had observed in her best-known work on death and dying, in order to account for similar stages observed in those who are grieving. Following the death of David Kessler's son, he discovered there was something missing from the 5 stages of grief and loss, and he wrote about it in the book Finding Meaning, the 6th Stage of Grief. Kessler was recently a guest on the Unlocking Us podcast. Here is an excerpt of his interview with Brene Brown.
People thought there was an end to grief and that you would get to acceptance and be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought acceptance is not enough. I need to find meaning. I need to find meaning for my son. And so just in talks, all of a sudden, my publisher was like, this is a book, you've got to write it. I talked to the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation and her family, and I said, this is what I want after acceptance. I think this is what our world needs now. And they were so amazing that they gave me permission to add a stage to those iconic stages. I think for people in grief who don't care about which model is the correct one, the stages are a little scaffolding that just helps you know there is something. There's some sort of structure loosely that will be there for me. And I wanted them to know, as you deal with acceptance, there is meaning. Their life mattered. Their death mattered. And meaning can be how we mark it.
We will also be looking at the work of British writer and lay theologian C.S. Lewis. He is extremely well known by children for his Chronicles of Narnia series and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. His well-known work in Christian apologetics, Mere Christianity, was an adaptation of a series of radio talks that he did for the BBC during World War II. Lewis's book, A Grief Observed, was originally released under the pseudonym N.W. Clerk to keep readers from associating the book with him. It is a collection of his reflections on the experience of grief and loss following the death of his wife, Joy Davidman, in 1960. Ironically, many friends recommended the book to Lewis as a method for dealing with his own grief. During our session on Thursday, we will be discussing some of Lewis's observations. Our last activity for the evening will be to hear from my former colleague and chaplain resident, Tim Earhart. Tim will share with us about Psalms of Lament, and we may explore how you can use lament in your own journey with grief. That's all for now. See you soon.